Welcome to the Teacher's Lounge, a weekly forum for educators, students, parents, and anyone else who has been ever interested in what it takes to teach a class and be an educator in these difficult and challenging times. The Teacher's Lounge is a weekly forum brought to you by Studydojo and moderated by your host, Tyler Rust, a National Board Certified teacher with over 20 years of classroom teaching. Welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. Hi, welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. My name is Tyler Rust. I'm your host at the Teacher's Lounge, an experienced teacher, educator, historian, and now a blogger and a vlogger and an e-learner and all kinds of things. The Teacher's Lounge is a vlog and a podcast that I created after seeing some things that I thought were needing to be talked about when it came to education and teaching. The Teacher's Lounge is designed to be a place to talk about different issues that are affecting education and teachers, and to start the conversation and to encourage participation from other teachers, educators, and just stakeholders in education and the way we're going forward in this post-COVID-19 era. This is episode number 2 of the Teacher's Lounge. So it's still early days, and we're still walking down this path for just a short amount of time. However, every week seems to present a new and interesting topic for discussion. So join me today for the Teacher's Lounge, episode 2, where we're going to talk about evaluating students during the pandemic and what lessons we can learn from. So this episode is entitled Evaluation. If you enjoy the Teacher's Lounge, you should check out our other forums and products available from Studydojo and Studydojo. Recently, we launched a new online learning experience entitled United States History to 1877. It is a course available to you to walk through the first half of United States history. I'm sure you'd find it enjoyable, especially if you felt like you or someone you know didn't get all that they needed after our recent COVID-19 shutdown. There'll be a link to Studydojo and to our e-learning course, United States History to 1877, and you'll find that in the show notes for today's show. Check it out. You can also support Studydojo on patreon.com at patreon.com/Studydojo. Check that out for more on our blog links, our articles, and other resources that I think you'll find interesting, including more podcasts like the one you're listening to today. So today on the Teacher's Lounge, I was wanting to talk a little bit about evaluating students in the post-pandemic or even in the ongoing pandemic situation. We're looking at the start of a new school year right around the corner. And this start of this new school year presents us with great opportunities and great challenges. And I think it's different from what happened in early March when the pandemic caused schools across the country to shut down unexpectedly and kept students out of school for the remainder of the school year. It was tragic, it was unexpected, it was chaotic to say the least. And ending the school year after that experience, I think, was disappointing to say the least, but also a moment of reflection. Because if there's one thing that being an educator and working in schools requires of any professional is constant reflection. Constant reflection on what just happened, how did it work, how did it succeed, how did it fail. Obviously, there's a long list of things that failed because of the COVID-19 shutdown and its impact on education. But I think the other part of this reflection piece is how to avoid those same failures as we begin a new school year in just a matter of weeks or even a month or two. We don't want to have the many problems that I think were evident to anyone, students, teachers, parents, community, that happened. And I think one of the biggest problems, of course, was engagement. Now, today on the Teachers Lounge, we're going to be talking about evaluating students during the pandemic, and this, I think, bridges nicely with with the topic of evaluation and engagement. The one thing that I saw students kind of engaging with was how they would be evaluated. And one thing I saw a lot of schools struggling to engage with was how to evaluate students equitably. That's a real challenge for schools because equity is not only at the heart of everything we do in education, it's also the law. And schools need to be very careful about how they approach equity in this era, because there are, I'm sure, many lawyers out there who are just drooling at the opportunity to bring a lawsuit against a school or a school system because of unequitable outcomes as a result of the pandemic. So keeping equity in mind is an important cornerstone topic as we look at evaluating students. The thing that got me thinking about this topic today was an article that I came across on Vox, and I'll link to this article in the show notes for today's episode. The article on Vox was entitled, "It May Be That I Never Go Back to the Grading System." Now that headline is great. It caught my eye and made me really want to dive deeper into what that meant, because a new grading system is something I think it needs to be understood, needs to be kind of fleshed out, needs to be explored. It's an opportunity that the pandemic presents to us to reinvent education in a new and better way than we had going forward. One of the great opportunities of any crisis is the chance to throw out the old stagnant ways that wouldn't necessarily be abandoned in a normal situation. The crisis allows for a clean break and a cleaning of house, so to speak. Now, grading systems are complicated. That in itself could be an entire other episode of the Teachers Lounge, and I may yet do one on grading systems and different types of grading systems. But what I think this should focus on today in this episode of the Teachers Lounge is how to evaluate students during this pandemic. Now, a lot of schools, including universities, adapted generous pass-fail policies to accommodate students because of the pandemic. And generous was the right word in that situation. Because of the different situations students were thrown into when schools shut down, the idea of grading everyone based upon the same access and environment was no longer possible. So you didn't have students in school where the playing field could be the same. You didn't have students with access to technology on campus where it would be the same. And so the generous pass-fail policies adopted by schools and universities was really because of the lack of equity that students had because of the shutdown and the shelter in place. And so this is where the rethinking of educational grading systems starts, is because if you can't equitably evaluate students, you got to find a new way to do that. And so one of the things that a lot of students found was that, or a lot of teachers found, is that the engagement of students through distance learning led to a lack of success. And how do you grade a student because they're no longer inspired by a Zoom meeting or a Google Hangout? And does that really reflect their understanding and mastery of the content? And I think the answer to that would be no, right? Because a student isn't engaged or excited about watching a webcam or a live feed, it doesn't necessarily reflect that they don't understand or can't master the content of a course. So asynchronous education is what we're kind of dealing with here. Students who are basically on their own and having to navigate the materials without a professional educator in the room with them to check for their understanding and to give them the shortcuts and the guidance necessary to save time and to master the material in a reasonable amount of time. That doesn't happen with this pandemic educational model. And so what we have to think about is how we can use different course structures to help students to show their mastery and not necessarily be turned off from the materials because they're doing it from home. So the way that this article on Vox talks about it is really interesting. Starting with a 5th grade teacher, her name was Lauren Anderson, and she teaches at the Lido Elementary School in Long Beach, New York. The article interviewed Lauren Anderson, who talked about the use of physical objects and visuals to stimulate her students, especially special needs students, which is a growing population that is very, very differentiated in this pandemic environment. It's one thing to teach a special needs students, which is entirely different from teaching a student without learning disabilities, learning differences. So using things like Google Slides and Google Classroom is one way that this teacher, Lauren Anderson, found to approach her students. But she doesn't give letter grades, and that's new, right? The abandonment of the letter grade, the A, the B, the C, the D, that may be something that we need to really consider as educators. Lauren Anderson doesn't give letter grades, but she gives a lot of written feedback to students. Now, that would require a lot more time on the part of educators to give more detailed written feedback about the learning of every individual student in their class. But in this pandemic, we may be looking at classroom environments that have fewer students, teachers with fewer students in their caseloads, and teachers with more time available for written feedback because they don't have to do classroom management. They don't have to do all the million other things that teachers do when they are teaching in a classroom in a traditional setting. So the article says that Lauren responded, she felt like her school was really understanding of the importance of the emotional and social well-being of the child first and foremost, rather than their grades. Anderson started a program she called Meet and Eat, where her students meet every Friday to eat lunch together and have face-to-face interactions. She said this helps to encourage socialization amongst her students because of the nature of her class, and it's really difficult for her to teach by speaking at a child. And most of her work, she says, and remember, this is 5th grade, most of her work, she says, is differentiating and moderating content to make it accessible for each child based on his or her needs and abilities. So I know what you're thinking. How can I meet and eat with my students in a post-COVID or an ongoing COVID environment? Well, I agree that is difficult. But one of the things that is being discussed right now with schools is having fewer students in every classroom. Obviously, classroom size and 6 to 8 feet separation for each child is a formula that has to reconfigure what a normal classroom really looks like. And so it could be that instead of the typical 28 to 38 kids in a class, yes, sometimes there are 38, that you have 6 to 10. And another thing that's been talked about with education is that you wouldn't have students necessarily leaving, but you'd be spending your entire day with one class, sort of a reduced number of classes and longer whole day classes. Now that is something that would allow for this meet and eat to really take off. Obviously, you're going to be talking and working with students in class to the best of your ability, to the best of their ability, with safety foremost. But then eating with your students as a way of extending the understanding and engagement, right? Incorporating, social distancing, safe practices, but where eating with your students becomes a way to deepen the learning, I think is one thing we can talk about, right? Obviously, there are problems, and I welcome your comments on this. So, drop a note in the comments section for this episode of the Teacher's Lounge. Let me hear your thoughts about eating with your students in this pandemic. Is it possible? What other issues haven't we raised here today that you might want to mention? And we can always come back to that, and we can deepen that discussion for the benefit of all teachers, parents, and students on the Teacher's Lounge. I wanted to take a minute away from our discussion to just tell you a little bit about a product that I use that helps me to make this show, this vlog, this blog, this podcast possible. I like it so much I wanted to take some time to recommend it to you. It's called Blubrry.com. It's spelled a little differently. It's BLUBRRY.com. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for today. I want to recommend that you check it out because it makes podcasting a lot of fun. It's something that I find to really deepen my understanding of this whole endeavor, and it also is really great for newcomers. If you're new to this whole vlogging or podcasting game, so to speak, I want to encourage you to give it a shot. Take a look at Blubrry.com. They have a lot of wonderful tools and applications to help you get started in this, and it's really light on the wallet, which is great for any newcomers like myself. So check out Blubrry.com for all of your podcasting needs. So to continue today, I also I'm talking today about engaging with students and changing grading scales, changing grades as a way to adapt to this COVID-19 pandemic era. And I was inspired to do so by looking at an article from Vox.com, which was about this topic. And we talked a little bit in our previous segment about eating with students and how using more time with a smaller number of students to deepen their understanding might be one way to increase engagement outside of traditional grades, and to give more written feedback rather than the A, the B, the C, or the D that has traditionally been used. The article that inspired this is on Vox.com, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes for today's show. And it goes on to talk about Patrick Iber, and if I mispronounced his name, I apologize. He's a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And it says Patrick Iber was teaching a large lecture class of about 80 students on Latin American history this semester when the pandemic hit and he was forced to move his class online. Iber said he generally puts a lot of effort into student interactions so that his students feel connected to one another in his courses and encourages them to communicate with one another, to meet in small groups, and to work out problems together. But Iber said this kind of collaboration proved difficult with remote learning. And I would agree, absolutely. In a secondary or post-secondary environment, the idea of a breakout group and a class discussion is kind of essential to what we do, because you're not necessarily teaching behavior as much as you're teaching critical thinking. And critical thinking really feeds off this discussion of ideas. It's hard to do that on an online format. So Iber goes on to say, the biggest challenge, I think, was maintaining a sense of community around the classroom. So that's important, a sense of community. I think that teachers, educators, professors could use more of that as a way to engage students and to keep them showing up and showing what they know. Using some techniques to create a sense of community would be one of the first things to think about as you try to overcome the limitations of the technology. Some of the things to do there might be difficult, awkward, or just require some growth mindset around. So some of the things could be to build out from the school culture and identity that is already in place at your site, at your school, at your university. Be it with the use of the mascot, the use of the school motto, the singing of the school song, to emphasize or overemphasize these common community signposts, for lack of a better word. If you as the educator can ham it up, play it up, have fun with the culture that is already in place, to make that connection in an overly fun and energetic way can be one way to really turn the students onto the learning that you're trying to get them to do. While, showing the mascot, singing the school song, having a class motto or mantra might not be something that you are used to doing. Remember, in this pandemic era, we are all struggling to find our own comfort zones and work outside of them for the first time in a long time. So if singing the school song isn't something you like to do, or if singing isn't something you do well, check your ego at the door and try it. Just try it, right? If you sing really badly, it might be really fun for the students to see you trying something new. And that's what this is all about. We're all trying something new. And if they see you willing to take a risk, to put yourself outside your comfort zone and to engage, your leadership, your role model might be all that it takes to increase their engagement. So think about that. Think about using a sense of community that already exists at your school through the mascot, the school song, the school motto, and make yourself part of that. Make yourself a cheerleader for that sense of community. And from that, you can then get more engagement. So the next part of the article I'd like to share with you is about a 9th grade algebra teacher at Pioneer Valley Performing Arts Charter Public School in South Hadley, Massachusetts. This educator's name is Joseph Grabowski, and if I'm mispronouncing his name again, I apologize. The article talked about how some students have to share 1 or 2 laptops, or even share them among 5 or 6 kids. It's stunning to think about the inequitable application of technology, but it's true. Students don't always have all that they need, and schools certainly didn't provide it and aren't capable of providing it now that we're at distance. The article says, student engagement and access have been the biggest obstacles for Joseph Grabowski as he acclimated to remote learning. Grabowski teaches at a charter school, and his students come from around 40 different districts in western and central Massachusetts. As a result, some of his students had long, tiring commutes to school for in-person classes. At home, some do not have access to the internet or to other technology, have to share 1 laptop with 5 or 6 people, or have to look after younger siblings who are all learning remotely. So that is something important to understand, is that we need to maybe readjust our expectations, and among them our grading policies, because of the environments that our students may be locked into at this point in time. The article goes on to say that Grabowski said he believes there's no clear answer for how to grade right now. Pass-fail for the semester makes a lot of sense, but it is tough for colleges and for GPAs. Using the existing grading scheme is inequitable for students who cannot participate in remote learning as meaningful as other students. So he also stressed the value of written feedback in comparison to grades. He says, I think feedback during this time is the best thing we can give kids. So there it is again. Maybe we need to step away from the A's, the B's, and the C's, and to give more thought to written feedback as a way of showing mastery and highlighting areas for improvement. Something to think about right there. Did you know that the Teacher's Lounge is connected with History Dojo and Studydojo? These are my two efforts to promote greater understanding of history, of education, and e-learning, which I believe to be the future of education going forward in this post-COVID-19 era. The more educators can get involved with e-learning and make it a bigger part of their practice, the better it'll be for students going forward. My offering to you today is an e-learning course that I've recently published on thinkific.com. And you can reach my e-learning course, which is United States History to 1877, on studydojo.thinkific.com. And if you check it out, I think you'll find that for a monthly membership fee of a very reasonable amount, that you will be able to access not only this first course, but if you act now, I will allow you to access for no additional cost my next e-learning course, which is United States History after 1877, covering the second half of United States history. So follow the link in today's show notes, and you'll see it here on the screen. Follow the link and sign yourself up, and you'll get not only one great course, but early access to the second half of United States history, U.S. history after 1877. This has been the second installment of the Teacher's Lounge, episode number 2, and I'm really grateful that you joined me today. We have done a deeper dive into some of the issues surrounding student engagement and evaluation. And we looked at an article from Vox.com that interviewed a number of different educators on this. And it seemed like a couple of takeaways that we might have from this is that we need to reevaluate what an A, a B, and a C really means. And we might have to get rid of them altogether. That would be a radical shift in education, but an opportunity, I think, for reinventing what education really means. The idea of giving written feedback to every student may sound like laborious, tedious, and time-consuming. But remember that as we reevaluate and reinvent education, we can make time for this written feedback assessment by shifting from what we used to spend a lot of time doing, and for which we now have more time to devote to written feedback. So it's not that we have to do more, it's that we have to do it differently. And we have to ask our students to think differently too, because remember, they are trained to seek an A on a report card. And that fundamental shift in how students think is something that we have to communicate to parents and community stakeholders as well. Because colleges are also designed around GPAs and letter grades. And we might not actually be able to expect students to perform using that metric any longer. It's a great opportunity. It's an unbelievable task, and one that I think we should embrace rather than try to avoid. And so that's the takeaway for today. I hope you enjoyed this short discussion. It's just the tip of the iceberg, and there will be more to talk about. So please check out the show notes for today's show. Check out that article on Vox.com, and let me know what your thoughts are about changing the evaluation system and equity in education. My name is Tyler Rust. I'm really grateful that you took the time to join me today for this, and I hope that you will subscribe and hit that like button. Spread the word about what we're doing here at History Dojo for the Teacher's Lounge. Thank you very much.